Hello and welcome to Power, People and Planet. I'm Kumi Naidu, and this is a series of candid conversations with activists, community leaders, thinkers from around the world, which tackle some of the biggest challenges of our time. Today, we are speaking with Kate Raworth, an economist and author of Doughnut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. Kate, his name is known to many of us in social movements, is an esteemed economist, renowned for innovative and transformative ideas. She is a senior research associate at the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford. She is also the co-founder of the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, which is turning the ideas of Doughnut economics into action. Her work has gained global recognition, inspiring governments, organizations, and individuals to reframe economic thinking and strive for a sustainable and equitable future. Kate, thanks so much for speaking to us. It's a real pleasure to have you join us. So first, let me just say that Doughnut economics is a term that many of us involved in social issues, whether it's around climate or whether it's around gender equity, that we have heard over the last several years. But the reality is, even speaking for myself, I'm not as on top of it as I should be. So firstly, for those who may not be familiar with the concept, what is Doughnut economics and how is it different from what we have now? And very welcome to Power, People and Planet.
Thank you. Great question. So how is it different from what we have now? Let me start with what we have now, right? Because I studied economics at university 30 years ago, and I was really frustrated because I realized that when we study economics, we never actually ask, what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve here? It's implicit. It's endless economic growth. It's growth of national income forever. So I'm sitting here in the UK, in one of the richest countries in the history of humanity. But still, if you listen to our politicians and their economists, they will tell us that the success of this country and the solution to all of the problems we face will lie in yet more growth endlessly. So we have inherited economic systems that say success is endless growth. And yet we are witnessing extremes of inequality, extremes of ecological and climate breakdown. And it's time to start again and say, what is the goal? What are we actually trying to achieve? What would human prosperity look like? And that's where the donut comes in. So it's a diagram I drew. I doodled on top of somebody else's diagram 10 years ago. So think of a donut. Think of the kind of donut that has a hole in the middle. So it's like a ring, an inner ring and an outer ring.
Right.
And if you think of that donut, then the hole in the middle of the ring, in the middle of the donut, that's the place where people are falling short on life's essentials. That's where people do not have the resources they need for health and education, for decent housing, food, water, electricity, transport, income, where people don't have respect, social equity. We must leave nobody in that hole. And I can say that with clarity because the world's governments in the Sustainable Development Goals, they have agreed that every person in the world has a right to meet these 12 essentials of life that are in the hole in the middle of the donut. So we need to make sure that everybody in the world has enough resources in their life to meet those essentials. Leave no one in the hole. But, it's a big but, as we collectively use Earth's resources to meet our essential needs, and then many people with high incomes meeting not just their essential needs, their wants, their luxuries, we start to put pressure on the life support systems of our planetary home. We start to induce climate breakdown, ecological breakdown. We acidify the oceans. We withdraw too much water from lakes and rivers. We convert too much of the land. We create a hole in the ozone layer. And so we are actually putting so much pressure on the planet through our use of resources that we are breaking down the life-supporting systems of our planet, the 9 planetary boundaries. The Earth system scientists said these 9 systems, these are what make life work on Earth. They keep Earth in a stable, healthy state, like with a stable climate and healthy soils and fertile soils and abundant biodiversity and recharging fresh water and a protective ozone layer overhead. Don't overshoot these boundaries. So in the simplest of terms, the goal is to meet the needs of all people within the means of the planet. And that becomes the goal of economics. I believe all economics should be focused
Absolutely.
around achieving that. Because if we're not achieving that, what are we aiming to do?
Exactly. So just for clarity, do you mind I think it'll be a really good wake-up call for all of us. And I think like even people like you and me who see the data and so on, probably it's a good thing to remind ourselves what those 9 planetary boundaries are and roughly how we're doing on each of them. If you can just bullet point them very quickly, what they are and your assessment on a scale of, say, 0 to 10, where 10 is we're doing well and 0 we're doing bad.
Great question. So the 9 planetary boundaries, in fact, Earth system scientists have precisely documented these 9 and then are saying, where are we on them? And they're coming out with new updates of this all the time. So let's start with climate change. We cannot put too many carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere that we cause climate breakdown. We know that we are already way over on that, right? The world has agreed to try and keep global heating to 1.5 degrees, and that's already climate change. I mean, look at the world,
Exactly.
The crises that are induced now.
And we're just pushing on 1.2 now,
degrees.
Right? Just to be
clear. Yeah. So already, I mean, this does not feel safe already. So we are way over the limit and nowhere close to coming back within that at the moment. This is what's catching a lot of attention in the world at the moment. Ocean acidification is very closely related to that.
Yes.
Because ocean acidification is caused also by carbon dioxide, that instead of going in the atmosphere and
being absorbed by trees,
intensifying the heat in the planet, it gets dissolved in the oceans, and it actually starts to acidify the oceans, and then it undermines the conditions for sea creatures and shell-based creatures to form, and that undermines the ecosystems within the sea. Then we've got ozone layer depletion. So back in the 1980s, right, we first saw that there was a hole opening up in the ozone layer, and that was due to human-made gases, actually, that we often used in refrigerators. They were called CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, and they were going up into the ozone layer and actually destroying its protective properties. The ozone layer protects us from UV rays, and they protect all living beings on Earth. So we have actually, this is the one boundary where there's been some positive news on, because we saw we were opening up a hole in the ozone layer. There are a few major companies that had an alternative technology, and the world acted to come back within and to help actually repair that. So this is the one boundary where we can say we as humanity have taken collective action actually to start to turn this story around. Then there's air pollution, all sorts of particulate pollutions from the chemicals and the gases that are released in the world, and chemical pollution that goes in the soil. And this includes all plastics and persistent organic pollutants and nuclear waste and anything that's human-made that isn't natural, that humans are releasing into the atmosphere, into the soils and the lakes. And plastics is a really clear one that we all see, right? We see plastics on the beaches,
Certainly.
Plastics in the water, plastics in the soil, microplastics we know in our own bodies. And then, so that's the first 5. And we're over on air pollution and on chemical pollution. Then on biodiversity loss, the loss of diversity of species, but also the loss of the integrity of the web. You know, if you think of a spider's web and you think of the interrelationship between species, it's a bit like a spider's web all held together. And if you poke too many holes in that web, it will just eventually collapse.
Yeah.
Then there's land conversion. So we're turning too much of nature's natural surface into cities, highways, agriculture, farms, cattle raising, and we're removing that biodiversity from that surface and exposing it, exposing the soil as well. Withdrawing too much water from lakes and rivers or damming them, so that we're essentially interfering with the hydrological cycle of fresh water, of which we know we depend. And then nitrogen and phosphorus, which is fertilizer. So when we're practicing agriculture, applying fertilizers that often don't get taken up by plants, they actually leach out through the soil off into waterways, and they turn it green because it sucks all the oxygen out of the waterways, and you get kind of an algal bloom, and that kills off fish and all other aquatic life. So these 9 planetary boundaries, some of them operate at the global level, like climate change, and some of them happen very locally, like nitrogen and fertilizer runoff, local lakes and rivers, local land conversion. But together they aggregate into disruptive effects that actually start to destabilize the life support systems of our planetary home. So when we put pressure on all of these, and as system scientists say, we're putting too much pressure on around at least six of these 9 boundaries, and the measurements are improving every year. So the alarm is getting stronger, and this is the situation we have to turn around. And all, or economics, just to add, economics, the eco of economics means household. Ecos means the household. Ecology means knowledge of the household. Economics means the management of the household. Well, as Satish Kumar always says, how can you even think you're going to practice economics? How are you going to manage the household if you don't even understand the household? So every economist should be schooled in these life support systems of our planetary home, because this is our planetary household. And if you don't understand it, you've got no chance of protecting and restoring it.
So, Kate, thank you for making it so clear that on many of these 9 planetary boundaries, we are in quite a scary place, right? So, especially with climate, but also with some of the others. Now, let me ask you, what's your sense of why it is so hard for us to get the policymakers, both in government and in the business sector, especially big business, to understand that their children as well as our children are just at the equal risk of failure to act with the urgency and make changes? Why is there such a cognitive dissonance or a lack of urgency? While you're thinking about that, I want to very painfully make an observation, and that in climate specifically, we actually say that, it's not only that we're dealing with climate injustice, we're also actually dealing with climate apartheid. The demographic picture of which parts of the world historically created the problem, but which parts of the world are paying the first and most brutal price already, provides a very uncomfortable demographic picture. And that is why many of us in the global south for more than a decade now have been saying we have to deal with the reality that's climate apartheid. And then just to say that the one area where you said we made progress on ozone, and that's something that we need to learn and build on. One of the things that, and I don't know enough about it, therefore I'm just going to draw on your knowledge here. One of the things that somebody said to me, the reason we acted so fast on the ozone rather than some of the others is that the impacts of this ozone was very, very much immediately felt in the global north, and global north policymakers actually moved the agenda forward. I don't know whether it's true or false. I'd love to get a reaction on that perception of why is it we can't move the dial as fast as the science says we need to move. Thank you.
I also don't know if that's true or false around what you just said about ozone layer, but it fits very well with what you just talked about around climate apartheid and what I'm about to say about why can't we get policymakers to see and act fast enough. And I think it comes from the Western global North cultural mindset that has been taught through economics, which, economics is like the mother tongue of public policy. And the economic mindset that I inherited, that I studied, just completely fails to recognize that humanity is part of the living world, that we are part of nature and in an interdependent, delicately balanced web of life. It's completely missing. And I'd say it's missing from much of our cultural context, but particularly in economics. When you study economics, it starts with the supply and the demand of the market, right? So economics education goes straight in and starts with markets. It doesn't start with, hey, what are we trying to do here? What's the vision? What's the goal? It starts with markets and supply and demand. So it puts price at the center of our vision and a market-based activity, and then has a big debate about market and state. And it's about human-created institutions focused around monetary cost. What it's ignoring is that human society is a subsystem of the living world and utterly dependent upon it. And all the materials and resources that we use and all the waste and pollution we create goes into this living planet on which we depend. to me, that is the fundamental, because it means that when you want to talk about environmental degradation, acid rain, hole in the ozone layer, climate change, in economics, economists say, yes, that's what we call an environmental externality.
Yes.
And an externality in economics is something that doesn't show up in the price. When a buyer and a seller agree to exchange something for a price, there's an impact on somebody else.
Absolutely.
Whether it's climate change, whether it's a bicycle rider sitting in the fumes of a car that someone bought, right? There's an impact on somebody else. That impact is so critically large now. We are talking about the sixth mass extinction. We're talking about climate breakdown, hothouse Earth. Still, economists call it as an externality. So to me, if you're going to go around calling the breakdown of the living world an externality,
yeah, it's incidental.
It's telling, right? It's peripheral. It's external. It's external to what? It's not external to life. It's essential to life, but it's external to the world of economics we've created, which starts with markets and prices and return and profit and return, gain, as Polanyi put it. Now, I think that aligns very strongly with what you just said about climate apartheid, because if it's external, it's going to be particularly external if it's not near me, right? If it's far away from me.
Yeah. Somebody else's problem.
It's easier to think of something as being external. So it would chime very well with the possibility that one of the reasons why the ozone layer depletion was acted upon is because that hole was opening up over parts of the global north. So I can't verify that,
Sure.
but it certainly would make sense. So we have to that's why with the donut, I put humanity back at the center, and also the center, the hole in the middle of the donut, and the metrics of the donut focus on people who do not have the essentials of life. It doesn't focus on how well people are living and how the averages, that the good levels that people are achieving. It focuses on making visible people who still have not met their most basic needs. It focuses on, shows data on people who are hungry, who are illiterate, who do not have access to healthcare, who have short lives, who do not have access to electricity, who do not have access to clean water. And it highlights deprivation, because I think it's essential from a human rights point of view to make visible deprivations in humanity globally. This is what we as humanity should be acting on first, rather than saying, oh, look at the very positive levels of health and education achieved in some countries. We should be focusing on where is that deprivation. And of course, it's predominantly in the global south, and we have it amongst, extremely unequal countries. I'm in the UK, I'm in one of the richest countries, and yet there's people queuing at food banks and sleeping in the streets in the city I live in. So there's deprivation worldwide, we know, but it's predominantly in the global south. And as you said, the climate breakdown, and also much of this breakdown of all of these planetary boundaries has been driven by an industrialization and growth process dominated in the global north. So there are very, very strong dynamics between regions of the world that have to be acknowledged.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I fully agree with that. I just want to observe that on your last point, we also need to be so mindful about the global south in the global north and the global north in the global south, in the sense that part of the problem that we have in perceptions, I always say now that the worst disease that humanity faces is not COVID, but it's a disease we can call affluenza, which I describe with others as a pathological illness, where we've been led to believe that a good, meaningful, decent life comes from more and more and more material acquisitions, and that in the process we can legitimize and make normal obscene levels of inequality. Now, the phrase that you use about we need an economics of putting people at the center. When I was at Civicus, World Alliance for Citizen Participation, between 1998 and 2008, I worked with a colleague whose name might be familiar with you, called Lorenzo Fioramonti, who produced a book called GDP, Gross Domestic Problem, the world's most powerful number. And that is one of the things that Western economics has given us, right? That the measure of wealth is GDP. And as we try to point out to people that if you go and chop down a forest, right, that is probably a positive tick on the side of GDP rather than any of the social consequences. How important is it from you that the measurement of wealth itself is so flawed? Because in a way, what you are doing is you are presenting a different way of thinking about how we measure wealth, even though you're doing it very much from an environmental centric way. But how big a problem is it that the very calculation of wealth is so fundamentally flawed? And that needs to change.
I think it's really key. And I think the metrics that we use, they reveal our worldview, right? The metrics that we use to monitor a system reveal our worldview of what matters and what's central and what's peripheral. And so the donut is both social and ecological. It's combining human rights, that deprivation, as I said, with ecological integrity. So leave no one in the hole falling short on their essential needs in life. Don't overshoot Earth's life-supporting systems. To me, that is the guidance instruction for humanity in the 21st century.
No.
That is the guidance around which all of our institutions should be organized. And so I believe governments in every parliament in the world should be looking at their nation's position in that, and they all have very different balances around that, right? If we look at national donuts, and there's a fantastic website created by researchers at Leeds University called Good Life, you can see nations, for example, Malawi, right, on $1,500 per person, a lot of human shortfall, no overshoot of their pressure on the planet. They haven't overshot any planetary boundaries if we divide that up into a fair share. China in the middle would be a double whammy of significant human shortfall, significant ecological overshoot already. And then I could take, say, Denmark at the other end, not falling short, measured compared to the whole world, not falling short on social essentials, massively overshooting planetary boundaries, just like all high-income countries are. All high-income countries have big red overshoot of their planetary boundaries, a lot of red shooting outside the edges of the donut. And to me, first of all, let's catch ourselves anytime we hear ourselves or anybody else talking about developed countries or advanced nations. I always say that. Sorry, where do you mean? Because there's nothing developed
about the
or
way
advanced about overshooting planetary boundaries.
Absolutely.
Right? You're destroying the life support systems of the planet, and you are directly, measurably undermining the possibilities for people in climate emergency situations, many of them the lower income countries in the world, to have food and water and stability and security and not live with flooding and drought and a continent on the move seeking places that aren't so hot that humans can't survive. So there is nothing advanced or developed about overshooting planetary boundaries, but all countries, all high income countries are doing just that. So I think it's really important we change our language as well as our metrics. So yes, we need to change the metrics. And that's why I would argue that GDP, which is just national income, it's the monetary value of goods and services that are sold in a country in a year. So it's things that are sold through the market or bought by the state. And of course, they're valuable. And of course, these things are also can be essential to our well-being, buying school books and putting in bike lanes and installing electricity and providing food, right? So they're valuable, but there's also a lot of things that are caught in there that are actually cleaning up the destruction, cleaning up after an oil spill, or cutting a forest, value of timber, loss of an ecosystem. So it's a far too crude, far too narrow measure. We need new metrics, and I would love to see governments in every country in the world nationally reporting against their own national donut. How are we doing? How have we done since last year on reducing deprivation in this country and ensuring that no one is falling short? How are we doing here on coming back within planetary boundaries? This is the accounting for which governments should be responsible. But I want to add one more thing, that GDP is not only a metric, and if only we could change the metric and focus on something else. We've created economies that are structurally dependent upon endlessly growing. And especially, I'd say, over the last 100 years, of very cheap fossil fuel energy, which was like jumping on an escalator and just going up. And many people say, we can explain growth. It's human innovation. It's technology. Actually, a lot of it has just been phenomenally cheap energy. And so we've got used to economies growing, and we've written that expectation of growth into our institutions. Financiers expect financial return on their shares every quarter, which puts pressure on companies to deliver growing margins and growing profits every quarter. We expect to invest our pension and get a much bigger pot of money back when we retire, because we expect the economy to grow. Yeah. So not only do we need to change the metric, we need to take that growth expectancy, that growth dependency out of our economies, especially in the high-income economies that need to learn not to continually to grow, but to come back within planetary boundaries and thrive.
Can I ask you quickly, Kate, did you look at what Bhutan offered to the world in any serious detail, where they offered a different way of looking? Instead of GDP, they talked about gross domestic happiness, a different measurement, which from the little I know about it, it sounds like it resonates with Doughnut Economics in a sense. Do you have any reflections on, because, the thing about it is, people, even in the mainstream, respond to something that comes from the global south like that, as, oh, those are nice sort of quaint little exotic people that came up with this, and it's talked about almost like as amusement. But people don't, in the intellectual production of knowledge, don't take what comes from the global south, which is the global majority, as serious as ideally they should. Your reflections on the global, gross domestic happiness as a, and how does that resonate with Doughnut Economics?
It's a great question. So first of all, let me pull back a moment and say, I'm thank you for raising this. When I first drew the donut, I was really struck by the traction it had back in 2012. And I was aware that I'd written down a lot of words. If I'd just written them in a long list, I don't think anybody would have blinked.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But the fact that I'd put them one circle inside another, right? Earth system scientists had come up with this planetary boundaries, and they'd drawn that in a circle. And I thought, well, if there were outer limits of pressure we can put on the planet, and those are called planetary boundaries, then I'm coming from a social justice point of view. I was working at Oxfam at the time, and I was thinking, well, if there are outer limits, there are inner limits too of resource access, and that's called human rights. Every person has a right to those resources, and that's why I drew a circle within a circle. And when I drew this and published it, it just got so much traction and interest and pickup. And in fact, I went to the UN and showed it to. It was in the run up to the Rio Plus 20 conference on sustainable development, and I remember showing it to the head of the G77, an Argentine leader at the time. And she tapped it and she said, this is how I've always thought of sustainable development. I want to know what the Europeans think. And I thought, well, funny that I've got a meeting with the Europeans tomorrow. So the next day I went to the European, a lot of European countries in there together, and I presented it. And one of them, in fact, the British delegate, he said, oh yeah, so I mean, I see, when we hear the Andean countries talking about Pachamama, and he kind of did this kind of waggly, it's just like that kind of cute, slightly fluffy thing. They talk about Pachamama. He said, I can see this is a sort of Western scientific equivalent. And I thought, well, if it serves as that, then this is going to be super useful, because and I've really come to think of the donut as almost like a Western mindset recovery program, moving towards a wisdom that is held in the medicine wheel of Turtle Island, and it's held in the Buddhist double endless knot, it's held in the Taoist yin yang, it's held in the Celtic double spiral, it's held in the Maori takarangi.
Absolutely.
The Koan, Zen Koan, so many cultures have this symbol. I looked at the symbols that indigenous cultures for millennia have drawn to symbolize health, well-being, thriving, prosperity, good. And it was this dynamic circle. And I thought, I just have happened. I've stumbled into something that they have long known. And so I see the donut as a Western mindset recovery program coming from Western thinking back towards what is held and long understood in indigenous communities. And of course, it's building on a lot of that deep knowledge and bringing it back just in a picture that's reflecting back. So coming to Bhutan, I was really honored that we were contacted by the government of Bhutan, who basically said, that donut looks like it has a lot of resonance with gross national happiness. And so we've been working with them together through the commission that they put together to come up with a new plan for the city of Thimphu. Can we bring the principles of Doughnut Economics, which are about creating regenerative design and distributive design, can we bring those into how we change the city? But also conversations with civil servants in Bhutan. Can Doughnut Economics in any way complement what they already have as a deep philosophy of gross national happiness? I'll just add, I've also been really honored and fascinated to be in conversations with somebody called Kamana Bhima, who is a Hawaiian indigenous scholar who is researching the ancestral circular economy of Hawaii and saying, look, but before the Americans arrived and made Hawaii part of the United States, we had an ancestral circular economy. We had very, very strong principles. So now we lost that. And now people are arriving talking about circular economy. See, that's who we were. And we're going to recover what we have and bring that. So I think there's a fascinating meeting of ancestral wisdom and circular economy and principles of living well together with ideas like this. So it's the pluriverse, right? It's the pluriverse of worldviews. And I humbly bring the donut into that. If it helps people who have been inculcated with a Western mindset like myself, start moving back and start appreciating a wisdom that's been long held in other traditions, then we find a meeting space and we can bridge and reconnect with the living world, as many others already have in the majority world.
So Kate, if you were to simply put it, what would you see as the similarities and differences between doughnut economics and the circular economy? Because it sounds like there's, again, a lot of overlap. Is it exactly the same, or where is it similar and where is it different?
Yeah, so there is overlap, but it's not exactly the same. So the doughnut economics begins with a very clear statement of a goal. The goal is to meet the needs of all people and to live within the means of this delicately balanced planet. That's the goal. Then we say, what kind of institutions, designs, principles would help us to move there? And for me, there are two big dynamics that I believe we need to put into play, right? We've inherited a world that's degenerative by design.
Yes.
Again, led by Western industrialization. We take Earth's materials, make them into stuff we want, use it for a while, and then we throw it away. And that's a take, make, use, lose. And we need to turn that from degenerative to regenerative. And we have to regenerate, not just circulate. We have to regenerate because we have run down, destroyed, depleted so much of the living world. We have a long journey to come back within and to restore and rewild and enable life systems to flow again. So we need to go from degenerative to regenerative. And I think of circular economy as one tool and principle within that. So that's where circular economy really belongs. It's a tool towards regenerative design. Uh-huh. But I want to couple from degenerative to regenerative with a second dynamic, which is that we've inherited a world that's deeply divisive,
yes,
as you've already alluded to. Extremes of inequality. Right. And even just in the last decade, the number of billionaires in the world has doubled from 1,000 billionaires to 2,000 billionaires. So there are inequalities globally, the global north within the global south, as you said, that's right. So the billionaires are living globally, but also we have inequalities within countries. And sitting in the UK, which is now one of the most unequal countries of Europe, I really feel that even here in one of the richest countries in the world, that extremes of inequality. So we've inherited systems that are deeply divisive, whether that's through legislation, inheritance, privilege, infrastructure, and they're capturing value and opportunity in the hands of a few. And there's absolutely no chance of meeting the needs of all within the means of the planet in such an unequal world. We cannot do it because the wealthy are, in their own lifestyles, massively overshooting planetary boundaries. We've heard the data about, the wealthiest percent of people in the world are alone burning through the remaining carbon budget. So we need to go from a divisive economy to a distributive one in which value and opportunity created are shared far more equitably with all who co-create it. And by that, what do I mean? For example, I don't know, the jacket I'm wearing. Who actually stitched this jacket? Right? Were they paid a living wage? Mm-hmm. They co-created the value of the clothing. And so they should be paid a living wage, even beyond a living wage. And what if they actually owned the enterprise of which they're a part in a global supply chain, whether it was in Bangladesh or Cambodia or where the West is currently sourcing? Mm-hmm. So the value that's created is really not being shared. It's being captured by the powerful institutions, by the brands, by the retailers. So we need to share value much more equitably. So we need to go from degenerative to regenerative. There's the circular economy as a tool in there, but also from divisive to distributive. And again, many practitioners of circular economy, they might come into this world of transformation through the lens of circular economy. I've seen it happen with multiple people, very excited about circular economy. And the two things happen. One, they say, hang on, circular economy isn't the goal. Like, the goal isn't to have an economy where materials recirculate and are reused. And I mean, that's not a goal. What's it for? It's for, and then something like the donut. We want a circular economy so that we come back within planetary boundaries. But the second thing that happens is people say, okay, this isn't just about circulating materials, because the way we use materials and who owns them and who profits from them is an intensely social distributional question. And therefore, we need to bring social justice into any conversation about the circular economy. Because there's a danger that you could say, let's create a circular economy. Let's ensure that materials are used again and again, not used up. Oh, you could have some big corporations come sailing in and capture that and own the materials and create corporate supply chains and block everybody else and capture the governance and capture the intellectual property. And it becomes a deeply divisive circular economy. We don't want that. So I like to separate those two principles. We need to be regenerative and distributive so that we never forget either. Just as you know from working for decades like myself in social movements and environmental movements back, I think in the 80s, it was either, oh, I work on social justice, you work on environmental things, kind of near the twain shall meet. And we need to bring them together because they're intimately interconnected. You can't do justice to one without addressing the other. That, I think, is one of the most valuable things that the donut does.
Yeah. And thank you so much for that work, because so many of us, especially from the global south, have been pushing for these silos to be broken and for us to really turbocharge intersectionality in our thinking and everything that we do, especially now. So, Kate, given where we are globally right now, how might these ideas of new forms of economic thinking get us out of the current sort of convergence of crises, polycrises that we are facing right now? Because, the question that I think we must ask ourselves is that we have been quite good, those of us in movements and so on, to develop and present alternative visions and alternative pathways of how humanity can reorganize itself. But it seems so difficult to shift the existing power dynamic and the existing orthodoxies that are in place. So do you see promise in these new economic thinking that's emerging from Doughnut Economics, Circular Economy, and others as having a distinctive role to get us out of the polycrises that we find ourselves in?
Big question. So these polycrises, some of them are, well, many of them, I think, have arisen because we've created systems that are predicated on endless growth, the pursuit of endless expansion, right? So if you have a financial sector that aims to endlessly expand, it will create a bubble, then pop itself. If you have an industrial system that endlessly is using fossil and materials, we will induce climate and ecological breakdown. If we have a system of human settlements endlessly pushing out into areas of wildlife, we will induce global pandemics.
Yeah, clearly.
So we need to move away from, again, human activity that is based on this endless expansionism. We've created these polycrises, and some of them we've now kicked into process, and we can't pull back in and say, oh, no, sorry, let's not go there. We've gone there. It's unleashed, right? So the climate impacts, that's why we have to have adaptation as well as rapid, urgent mitigation. So we can't make them go away, but what we can do is rapidly turn around the story so that we build as much resilience to the shocks that we've already gone and locked in, and we prevent future ones. So I think of the donut as moving us away from success is endless growth to actually success is thriving and resilience in the face of shocks we've created. Well, strategically, so you say, do I feel hopeful and do these ideas? I mean, yes, these ideas are popping up, and yet the crises are still building, and often you get the two things at the same time, right? You get social movements rising, and yet the vested interests continue to exploit. Let me tell you about the way I've been approaching it by setting up Doughnut Economics Action Lab. So I recognize that the work that I'm doing and Doughnut Economics Action Lab are doing is part of what I call big team work, right? We are all in a very big team of social justice movements and environmental justice movements. It's a big team. You have many different organizations and people holding different parts of that. Some people are locking on, exposing corruption, bringing down the old. Some people are quietly working for decades on the inside of the system, changing a line in the tax code that brings about tax justice.
Yeah.
And other people are envisioning possibility or demonstrating seeds of the future. So there is room for everyone, every personality, every kind of work. We need all of it. It depends on all of that. So the place where Doughnut Economics Action Lab is working, we're working at that space of possibility. We work with those who come to us and say, I love these ideas and I'm a town councillor or I'm a mayor and I actually want to put them into practice in my city. Then we say, let's go. Or as I said, the government of Bhutan, they got in touch. Let's go. What can we do here? Because rather than knocking on a shut door, we want to work with those who are ready to move, who say this idea, this concept already speaks to and visualizes what I already wanted to make happen, what the commitment that we've already made in bringing about transition in our town. I was in the city of Grenoble last week in France, and they have a vision of ecological transformation, a real social justice, and introducing new taxes to make a far more equitable city. They have ambition. And when they saw the donut, they said, that's the picture that speaks to what we here already want to do. So we're working with them. And for me, and we're also working with businesses, startups that say, actually, we're not in business to max out on profit. That's so 20th century. We're in business to sequester carbon, to build community, to create livelihoods for these people. So we have a mission-based enterprise, and the donut speaks to why we're here. We're working with them, with community organizations, with teachers, with cities. We are then learning from them. How do we start putting this to practice? And I am actually going to quote Milton Friedman here. Milton Friedman said, only a crisis, actual or perceived, brings about change. And when it happens, people will turn to the ideas that are lying around at the time. Mm-hmm. So what if an idea isn't just lying around? What if it's up and running?
Exactly.
What if you can point to towns and cities and districts, point to schools where it's already been taught, point to businesses that already say, this is what we're doing, this is how we've designed our company. That's the way that we are working. And to say, we're working that way, recognizing that we're part of a much, much bigger ecosystem of social change. And others are directly bringing down the intransigence of the fossil fuel companies and the companies that are corrupt and exploiting. We are at a different point in that system because we need, when we bring it down, when crisis opens up, you need the evidence of what you can go towards. And we're helping to build the proof of that practice. It's up and running.
So, Kate,
I'd love to know what you think about that.
So now, I think that's wonderful. I think your approach is right. It has a element of emergence in it, in the sense of not believing that we already have all the nuts and bolts together, because some of this will only work when it's co-created. In the examples you give of what's happening at municipalities, for example, the case that you're making in France. Now, I want to put you on the spot a bit here, right? And I want to sort of offer you a new job, right? So I want to ask you. So I want you to leave the Doughnut Economics Action Lab for a second, right? And let me give myself some real power here and make myself the Secretary General of the United Nations for a minute, right? And let's say you were appointed by the Secretary General of the United Nations out of a special assembly of the UN General Assembly, which says that if we don't fix our economics, we don't fix anything, right? And because I believe, and I've said so multiple times, that the climate change crisis is a manifestation of a broken economic system. If our economics was working, we wouldn't have the kind of overshooting of the planetary boundaries, not just on climate, but on everything else that you mentioned. So, because what I'm trying to push you to do here is to just help people who are not economists to think what would be the step-by-step actions that we would take to move from where we are to where we need to be. And just for a fictitious moment, if you had the power, right? But let's talk about effecting that power at a national level, right? So you had the power to change national economic policies, and what would be the step-by-step way that you would go to it? How would you advise any national government? Let's say my government here, which is in complete crisis in South Africa, right? But you can do that for every government in the world. What would the step-by-step, how would you transition from the rotten present to hopefully a inclusive future. While you think about the answer to the question, I'm going to give you another power, which is is if every country in the world as part of this exercise decides that we need a new social contract, by which we simply mean a new set of commitments by government to its people. What are the terms of engagement between government and its people, a social contract? For you, based on your experience, what would be the most important clause that you would want to have in such a social contract? Okay, which one will speak to you most? And then while you're reflecting on those two things, let me just throw my one criticism that I picked up in reading the literature on the Doughnut Economics, which I don't think calling it a criticism is probably a bit too strong, but I wanted to contextualize it because some people say that actually because I think it's great, especially for this observation, but that you started with the economics, looking at the 9 planetary boundaries, and that's how you evolved your thinking. But actually, would it have been exactly the same if you started off by putting at the center human well-being and all the human well-being measures, and then designed it in that way? And I asked the question partly because in our reality here in Africa and South Africa, where I'm living, we are facing a total mental well-being crisis as a result of what is happening with regard to climate and the planetary boundaries being exceeded, inequality rising, and so on. And maybe you can just give your sense of how you respond to that observation that well-being was not centered. I mean, if I was you, I know what answer I would give, but I'd like to hear your answer to that, and then we can flip back to the powers that I gave you as we come to the end of our conversation. Over to you, Kate.
Okay. So you want me to start there?
Yeah, start with the last one.
What if I had put what if I put, so just give me a bit more there. When you say human well-being, so instead of saying, for example, food, water, energy, health, housing, education, political voice, it would say what kind of metrics will be
So I was wanting to look at this.
Well-being?
I picked it up on the Wikipedia conversation, which was saying, I mean, let's not talk the specifics. It's about the starting point. Okay. Your starting point was planetary boundaries. If your starting point was housing, education, transport, would it have been different? Okay. Would the outcome be different? Is my question.
So if instead of so back in 2011, I was sitting at my desk in Oxfam and I saw this diagram. Somebody showed it to me, these planetary boundaries, right? It was a circle with those 9 planetary boundaries that I described earlier, and that humanity is overshooting them. And I thought, this is the beginning of 21st century economics. Oh my goodness, this is it. Because now we've got science and metrics showing us that human activity is overshooting the limits of this planet. But if there's an outer limit, there's an inner limit too. So I drew a circle in the circle, and I thought, how then do you quantify that inner circle? What would you do for that? The planetary boundaries was created by nearly 30 Earth system scientists in a peer-reviewed paper together. And I was thinking, okay, it needs to be something credible that won't get the pushback from the world's governments or from the world saying this isn't credible. So I thought, should I use Amartya Sen's work on human capabilities? You could use Manfred Max Neef's work. He wrote about fundamental human needs, which would, I think, speak much more to what you're saying now. So he talked about we have a fundamental need for subsistence, but also belonging, community, love, affection, respect. So we have these fundamental human needs. But there was no data. I mean, in 2012, there was no data about to what extent people felt these were being achieved in life. And I turned to what the world's governments were saying. This is before the Sustainable Development Goals, but it was in the run-up to that. It was what the world's governments were saying with the social priorities in the world. And the reason I did that was because when I drew the donut, and I wanted it to be credible to governments, and it worked because when I was actually invited to present it at the UN General Assembly in the end of 2012, I could hold the donut up and say, okay, what this is the outside is these 9 planetary boundaries drawn up and recognized by world's leading Earth system scientists. The inside are social priorities that I've drawn from you. I crowdsourced them from all the world's government's documents as they went to the Rio Plus 20 conference.
Mm-hmm.
And then when after that, in 2015, after they came up with the Sustainable Development Goals, I replaced it with the social priorities of the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's a power in that because it means all the governments in the world have already agreed that every person in the world has a right to live above this. These are the fundamental human rights. Now, I'll add another reason, which is over this past decade, there's been more and more metrics becoming available about, it's called subjective well-being, anxiety, health, happiness, perceived sense of belonging in community. Those are valuable, but I feel that some people, you get some very, very low income societies where people do not have sufficient food, healthcare, education, housing. And yet there can be in those societies extraordinary human resilience due to strength of community.
Yes.
That people actually are scoring not too badly.
Yeah.
And you might have very high income countries where people have so much money, so much wealth, but through the social anxiety actually might have a lower score. I feel that the rights of people to have health and education and housing needs to be made visible there. I think those things are preconditions for human well-being. Our ability to have thriving communities, feel belonging, creativity, protection, respect, these arise out of meeting our fundamental needs.
Okay.
So I haven't added them into the foundation of the donut, but it's a possibility of bringing them in as well. I just wouldn't say take out whether or not somebody has access to electricity or access to nutritious food, put in the fundamental. Also, I think speaking to governments have a responsibility to deliver on these fundamentals for people, because it is often governmental infrastructures and systems that make it possible. So that's my response. I want to know what you think, though. Would you say to?
No, I'm actually, it's been noted that, planetary boundaries concept does not take human well-being into account in a very direct sense. Although if Earth's ecosystems dies, then all well-being is moot anyway. So in that sense, it's fundamentally a well-being strategy, if you want, human well-being strategy. So I was just wanting to give you a chance to kind of problematize that a bit, and you've done it well, I think. So thank you.
Good.
But I want to just go to our last two questions again. And what's different now is you've done it. You've had an audience to talk to the UN General Assembly and put these ideas, which is amazing. But now I'm giving you a promotion from that. Now you have the power to implement. What would be like the first 3 steps you would, like say if my government here in South Africa was going to embrace this, what would be the sort of first 5 things they should do step by step to make the change into this?
Okay, so you were saying you were going to put me in the position of an advisor to the UN Secretary General. I think it's not, I know you know this, it's not as a powerful role as one might like, right? Because, of course, it's always contingent on what member states will or will not agree on.
Let's assume that he had more than the title. He had the ability to make things happen at a national level. Let's for a moment leave that.
More general than secretary. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go back to where some of our conversation began. I'll take an easy one. Let's change the system of national accounts. So let's change what we are recording, a nation against nation, and let's record the extent to which people are deprived and the extent to which that country is overshooting planetary boundaries. And with one sweep, that will take away this notion or the rankings of developed nations. They will disappear down the ranking. In fact, Costa Rica would come out top right now because Costa Rica is closer than any other country to meeting people's needs, and it's doing it almost within planetary boundaries. So you get a re-ranking of nations. And I think that's really important to take away I just can't bear the language of developed nations and developing. It just has an inbuilt, you should be more like us. Yeah. No, really, no. We all need to deeply transform. So that's an easy one.
Thank you for that. That's such a powerful point to be made, and we need to make it over and over again right now. Thank you.
Yeah. I would bring in the language and the dynamics that our economies need to be delivering are regeneration, right? We need to create regenerative economies, and let's create metrics and policies and very clear examples, and let's learn from the countries that are already doing it, from low-income countries that are regenerating, middle-income countries, high-income countries, all in very different ways because they have very different starting points. But what are they doing in terms of regenerative agriculture or a circular economy in industry. How can we all learn from them? But also distributive. How can we learn from countries that are redistributing the sources of wealth creation? I would also want those countries to rethink the relationship between market provision and state provision and commons-based provisioning, and widen the notion. Again, I've grown up in decades, born into sort of Thatcher's Britain, grown up in an era of market fundamentalism where it's, markets are first best, roll back the state, said Ronald Reagan, give over to markets. And that market fundamentalism has, I believe, pushed us a lot of this growth-based thinking and degradation of the living world because it's an externality.
Absolutely.
We need to move back towards recognizing the importance of state provision, but also state accountability for its provisioning.
Okay.
And I think we can see a resurgence of the commons. And the commons are a place where people can come together, not through the market of the state, but as a community and co-create value, whether it's a community garden, whether it's Wikipedia, whether it's actually a global stable atmosphere. So we need to widen the range of economic organizing that we can see. If I was invited to work with the government of South Africa, well, we have actually a tool that we work with governments, national or local. We unroll the donut and we create a portrait of that place and say, so we could ask this question, how can South Africa become a home to thriving people in an ecologically thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people that we impact worldwide and the health of the whole planet? So it has a local thriving within global responsibility. And we are working with towns and cities and states and a few governments to say, what would this new vision of our economy look like?
Well, I think
I'm going to come to your question around the social contract.
But let me just say that I would love to try to make that happen. But with regard to my country, it sounds like in many national spaces right now, things are a little bit stuck, short-term political issues and thing is just making it so difficult for visionary thinking, long-term thinking even to be possible. And I think your work is so important in that way. But let me give you the chance to share your social contract sense. What would you...
Well, before I go there, then let me just say, so the principles of Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we have the privilege of being funded by foundations. So everything that we do goes into the commons. All of our tools and our resources are on our platform, which is just doughuteconomics.org. So anybody can start a community organization, or any policymaker can say, if they're interested in that, they can get in touch with us. And we are building communities of policymakers, peer-to-peer, or community organizations. So there are community groups around the world that are starting to say, what would it look like for our city? And in fact, in Saldanha Bay, there's a group that have started doing this and looking. That's the first engagement with these tools in South Africa.
That's in the Eastern Cape province, for those who are wondering where Saldanha Bay is. It's a very beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, and they've started looking at how is this place living well within the means of the planet. So the tools are all there and anybody can start. And again, we respond when people get in touch and say, well, we want to do this. We say, great, we can show you how you can use the tools. They can be used by local NGOs. The ideal thing is if there's a local NGO or think tank using it in collaboration with local government, that's when it, because it's a framework that is adapted to make sense to the people, the culture, the history, the ecology, the economy of a place. So it's adapted and done differently in every place. Let me come to the social contract. I'm going to twist your question. You've given me power, so I'm going to
please
twist it around. I would really like to see a social contract between, as you say, citizen to citizen of the world. And let me tell you why. Living here in the UK, people are, for example, the local government are trying to move us from a very car-based culture to much more cycling and walking. So blocking some streets with bollards so cars can't drive through in the way they used to do. I'm taking you down to a super local example.
Yes.
And a lot of the response of car drivers is huge anger. Like, you are restricting my freedom. You are restricting my freedom. And I really reflect on that because I think notions of freedom, and again, it comes from a very expansionist mindset. I have the freedom to do everything that I can pay for. If I can pay for it, I should be free to do it. I think it comes, there's a very kind of simple principle of freedom, which somebody's going, look, I'm free to swing my arms around as long as I don't hit you. If I'm not hitting anybody, I can swing my arms. If you're standing so close to me that I hit you, I'm not free to do that because I'm undermining your integrity and health and protection. So I'm free so long as I'm not impacting on others. Now, if we just take that principle, again, this is where the problem with externalities. Oh, it's so far away. I'm free to do that. I'm sure those externalities are quite far away. Stick with that principle. We now know too much about the Earth to think that we can wave our arms around driving big SUVs around here in the global north, because what we know is actually they do have very strong impacts on other people's lives. I'm not hitting them with my hand, but the emissions that are coming out of my exhaust pipe are going into the air. They are adding to climate change. They're going into the lungs of the people right behind the car for sure. And they're going into the air and they're causing climate change. And we know, we can show, attributed studies show this is causing droughts and floods and hurricanes and destabilizing nations, cities, continents. So actually, this is not an infringement on your freedom. You do not have the freedom to infringe upon other people's rights these ways. So I really want climate change and our activities here to be recognized as part of infringing on others' rights. So I'd like a contract, global citizen to citizen, global north to global south, but citizen to citizen, recognizing how I lead my life must respect your ability to lead your life. And in the fullness of 21st century understanding of the ecological ways in which our lives are profoundly interconnected globally, this has new implications for what I can do, what I can expect to be able to do. And I need to live with a lot more sufficiency of resource and material use, because only when I reduce my impact in the world am I actually no longer undermining your chance of living well as you want to do, as much as I want to do. So I want to create that citizen to citizen. And of course, governments are fundamentally instantiations of citizens. They should be, right? They're elected bodies that citizens choose to create. And I would love a social contract that says, and let's write in with our governments that it doesn't become a relationship of once every 4-year vote. Let's have citizens' assemblies where we choose people by sortition, so randomly chosen, but make sure that that randomness is a really diverse group of people in our society, age, race, gender, income, experience, so that we bring a really diverse group of people in the room. And we will talk about how we're going to decarbonize this city or protect the water future of our city. And let's listen to experts and many voices. And these citizens who haven't been elected to government and so aren't worrying all the time how they're going to get re-elected in 4 years' time and pleasing on this short-term cycle, they can actually take long view decisions. And the evidence shows again and again that citizens' assemblies do take long view decisions.
Absolutely.
So let's have a contract that says governments commit to holding citizens' assemblies and actually taking seriously and taking into practice the vision that they come out with. The citizen who is free of seeking re-election.
That's brilliant.
Is an important voice to listen to.
I think that's a great addition. And I love the way you turn that around, because really at the end of the day, citizens can rise above the limitations of their own governments across national boundaries, as we've seen through transnational social movements, where people can find unity and sanity and push for a different way forward. And so I like that citizen to citizen commitment, especially across the global north, global south divide. I want to end by thanking you. And I want to thank you in a special way because, many of our listeners and viewers here are not specialists in economics. And what you have done is you've sort of taken your academic training and your social commitment and you've deployed it in a very accessible way, and it does offer us hope, because quite often, the economics conversations of our time are way above most of us, and that's one of the reasons broken economics can continue, because it's framed in a way that it's so, you cannot penetrate it at all. You can't understand it. You just get thrown some term, you don't know how that will impact on our lending, our borrowing, sorry. And then suddenly you have to just shut up and not say anything because the whole country's going to fall apart because our borrowing costs are going to go up, right? So, I just thought, I don't know whether you're familiar with the notion from Martin Luther King, which I quote very often, called creative maladjustment, where, speaking in 1965, he said, he called on people to be creatively maladjusted and not to adapt and to a broken economic system. For example, he said, I refuse to adapt to an economic system that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few when millions of God's children are smothering in an airtight cage of poverty. And in the longer version of the speech, he said, in fact, he called for the setting up of a new movement that was never set up. He said, I now call upon decent men and women from around the world to come together to set up a new international movement to be known as the International Association for Creative Maladjustment. Now, while that movement was never set up, I should tell you that you fit very, very well in the framing of being creatively maladjusted, which is basically saying we're not prepared to accept the status quo, and we are not prepared to accept that the world we have is the best that humanity can create for itself. So thank you, Kate Raworth, for all the work that you do, for inspiring so many of us, and for offering us pathways of optimism of how we can move into the future. Because let's face it, pessimism is a luxury we simply cannot afford in this moment of history. Thank you so much, Kate, and good luck with all the work that you do.
Thank you, Kumi. Can I end by saying thank you for the work that you do and the work that you've done over the years and the voice that you hold, because we need so much in this big teamwork, people like yourself holding that social and the ecological together and helping everybody see the connection, and your generosity and your clarity around the global north and the global south, and your generosity to invite people into that conversation. Thank you so much for the work you do. I'm honored to be on a big team with you. And I love that quote from Martin Luther King. Now you make me realize, that's why I never wanted to be introduced as an economist. It was only when someone said, you're a renegade economist. Like, I'll be that. Like, I'm a maladjusted economist and I'm going to name it. So yes.
No, you're not just maladjusted, you are creatively maladjusted.
Here's to creatively maladjusted. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and all the best with your work. Folks, we've been talking to Kate Raworth. Thank you so much for watching Power, People and Planet. Please like us, share what we are doing, and get the word around. Part of what we're trying to do here is to generate a more deeper conversation of how do we fix our broken planet, and you have to be part of it. And one of the ways of being part of it is deepening our knowledge, listening to different perspectives, and looking at how we embrace that in the different contexts that we find ourselves. Hope you're safe where you are, and thank you for watching and listening to Power, People and Planet. Thank you.